All right. So instead of going straight into the content and details here, let's think about what kind of app we can develop, right? So let's think of the most complicated app we can think of. Um, well, okay. After a few seconds, I think, what about a to-do app? Now, I know a to-do app is not necessarily the most simplistic, or sorry, the most complicated app that people have developed, but even when writing a to-do app, you have a lot to consider, right? So, what kind of things do I need for a to-do app, right? Well, I need some kind of database. I need something to store all of those to-dos. Then I also need to have an API, a way to consume and talk to the database, right? And then I actually need to write my Flutter app, and I need to write models that are translating whatever the server is responding with. And well, that seems like a lot of work. I might as well just throw away my laptop now and go home. Now, all jokes aside, I work at Google, and I recently got this laptop, and I don't know when my refresh is going to be. So I'm going to stick with this, and let's stay on topic here, right? But I'm still lazy. So let's see where we can kind of streamline things here. So I don't really want to write a database. It sounds like a lot of work. I also don't want to write a REST API because, again, I have to write all of that stuff by hand. And then anytime you need to add a new, anytime you need another endpoint, you need to have a conversation between your client side engineers and your backend engineers. And you also have to figure out, who's going to pass what. And that's a lot of complexity right there. And then I also don't want to write my model. I don't want to have to, already rewrite all of the information that I already wrote in my schema, right? That just, again, seems like way too much work. That's where Data Connect comes in. Data Connect is this magic that essentially allows you to not have to deal with any of those things. Hi, I'm Maneesh. I work on the Firebase Data Connect team. I have worked on the admin, JS, and the Flutter SDKs. And I'm really, really excited to share with you this new product that I've been working on and all of the really cool things that you can do with it. And later today, we're actually going to connect an application to our database in real time. So please stick around for that. Now, what exactly is Firebase Data Connect? Well, Firebase Data Connect gives you a relational database, and it also provides a schema, query, and mutation manager all built in, and it happens to use GraphQL. What exactly does that mean? Well, it means that you write the schema, you write the queries and the mutations, and then we'll handle the rest. We'll actually write the REST APIs for you. We'll write the we'll manage the Postgres database for you, and then we'll actually even generate your SDKs for you. So you don't even have to rewrite all of those same types and everything that you did on the back end. We'll generate that for you. All right. So here is an example of an app, right? We were talking about a to-do app. So on the left, we have the schema. So the schema is essentially what's going to be inside your database. Structuring what's going to be inside your database, right? So we have a table called task. So that task is going to have two columns, title and completed. Now, one thing that you're probably missing here is ID, right? So ID is something that we actually just generate for you. We automatically generate an ID for any table that doesn't already have a primary key attached to it. If you don't want ID as your primary key, you can also specify that, and we'll get into that later. Now, I have my schema, but then how actually am I going to consume this? How am I actually going to talk to the database? Well, that's where queries and mutations come in. So a query is going to allow you to retrieve information from your database, and then mutations are going to mutate it. It's going to modify your database. So we're retrieving data. We're going to retrieve our task list. So when you create a query, you want to make sure that you give a name for your query. You want to give, and then you want to give the access level for that query. So in our example, we just want to give the list of tasks to anyone who asks for it because we're not worried about security quite yet. We'll get a little bit more into that later. Now, you'll see inside the body of this query that we have tasks, right? But on the left-hand side, we haven't defined tasks anywhere. So what we do is whenever you save your schema, we'll automatically generate the GraphQL associated with it for you so that you have easy ways to, for example, get the whole list of tasks. And how does that get generated? Well, we actually just add, an S to the end of your table name, and that represents all of your tasks, all of the rows in your table. And then right here, you can actually also request the ID, the title, and then whether or not the task has been completed. So, and if you wanted to modify this so that you didn't have the ID associated with the task, or if you wanted to leave out some important some detail that isn't necessary, you're more than welcome and more than able to do that. Here's an actual example of what that code looks like in Dart. So if in your Flutter app, you can just write this one line, and then it'll get all of your tasks for you. Now, yes, I'm skipping over the 2 lines that are required to initialize your app, but this is essentially all you need to do besides initializing Data Connect in your app. So, all right, I've been talking a little while, but how does this work in a real world scenario? So here's an app that I wrote, a really small, simple application, but it essentially tracks what movies a user has seen. So it does a couple of things. It has user authentication built with Firebase Auth. It tracks what movies you have and haven't seen. And then it also stores all of your movies in a centralized database. All right, so all the slides are done. Don't worry, I'm not gonna yap at you for the rest of the time about slides. Let's actually take a look at some real code. So in our example here, we have an app, and well, it looks pretty much exactly like our screenshot. So let's click on watched. Okay, great, that looks great. So then let's actually reload this and see what happens. Well, it looks like, besides the images going away because of the Wi-Fi, it looks like the actual status for whether I watched this went away. That's because we don't really have a database, and everything is right directly in the app. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add Data Connect. So this app pretty much doesn't have any database or anything hooked into it yet. We're all going to do that live right now. So before this talk, I ran Firebase and Data Connect using our Firebase CLI, and it generated this Data Connect folder. So inside the Data Connect folder, you have a bunch of these different files. So let's look at them one at a time, right? So you have a dataconnect.yaml. This dataconnect.yaml essentially will help Data Connect understand how actually to talk to your service. So you have a service ID, a location, a bunch of other things. You should note that there's a data source specified right here, right? Postgres. Now, for right now, we actually have Postgres as our backend. Excuse me. But in the future, we hope to add other data sources so that you still can take advantage of generating SDKs regardless of what kind of data source you're using. So one key detail I haven't talked about here is the connect part of Data Connect. Now, what exactly is a connector? A connector is essentially a series of queries and mutations that are bundled together. And so they're essentially representative of all the queries and mutations your app might need. And so you might want to have multiple connectors for this situation where you have 2 apps. You have a client, and then you have an admin app. Why would you have that? Well, in the cases where you have different queries, such as an admin app that will ask for a list of users and then add users to your existing database, Or on the client side, maybe you just want to get like the list of tasks. And so in that situation, you have two completely different connectors that have two different use cases, because honestly, you don't want to have your client app generating list all users, because that's pretty inappropriate for your client app to be able to do. So let's take a look at some of this other code here. So the connector.yaml. So this is where the heart of the generation happens. So inside the connector.yaml, you have the connector ID, which specifies, of course, the ID or the name of the connector. And then you have the generate field, which will tell Data Connect what kind of SDKs you want to generate. And then you have the output directory and package. So output directory, of course, is going to tell the compiler where exactly to generate that code. And the package is going to say, it's basically the name of the package that you're generating. So this all makes sense. And then let's actually take a look at the generated stuff. So the generated README actually tells you how you can use your newly generated app. And so as your app generation changes, so will this README automatically. You don't have to write any code besides your GraphQL. And then if you look at our movies.dart, this is essentially where a lot of our models and queries and mutations will get instantiated. So, but more on that later. So let's take a look at the schema.graphql, right? So this is where we're going to define our schema. So again, I don't want to waste my time and try and actually write out this code myself. I want to actually ask Gemini, because, I mean, is it a 2025 demo without using AI? So I have this handy dandy Firebase Data Connect extension. Let's go ahead and click on the Gemini Code Assist extension and ask Firebase Data Connect to generate a schema for me. And now, okay, what am I going to ask Gemini? Well, let's ask Gemini to generate a schema for an app that keeps track of what movies the user has watched. So write a schema for an app that keeps track of what movies a user has watched. Now, this will be a solid test of the Wi-Fi. Depending on how, everything worked. Okay, but back when I was at my booth, it took 30 seconds, and I was really worried that I already broke something. So this is great. So we didn't have to write any code for this generation. So let's actually add this. And the generation is not perfect. All of these generation AI tools are not going to be perfect for you. So we're going to have to modify this a little bit, but let's go ahead and take a crack at it. So I'm not really too worried about genres here. I'm just going to use a string. So I'm just going to delete this table, not really worry about it. And then location type. Of course, when you're demoing these things live, Gemini will detect that you're doing this live and then give you results that you've never seen before. So if it's slightly different than you might expect, don't blame it on me. All right, so let's also clean up this watch table. So we want to keep track of what movies the user has watched. So I only really care about the movie and then what user is attached to that movie. So this is a join table between a user and a movie. And this is what we're going to do to keep track of what movies a user has watched. So, and then we also, in classic SQL fashion, need to specify what the primary key is going to be. So Gemini was really helpful and realized our composite key is going to have to be user and movie. And GraphQL automatically knows what primary keys are associated with different tables. So over here, we have the user table and the movie table that we're referencing. But GraphQL already, when it looks through this schema, knows that ID is the primary key for user, and then ID is also the primary key for movie. So we're referencing a bunch of things here. Let's go ahead and take a closer look to the user and movie tables. All right, so we have the user and movie, we have the movie table right here, but we want to add a couple of other things, right? Because let's take a look at our movies.json here. So our movies.json has a bunch of different fields here. We have ID, title, genre, image URL, description, rating, and all these different fields. Let's make sure that our schema reflects this. So, like I said before, ID is automatically going to be generated. And we have title, and actually I want my year to be called release year, to be a little bit more specific. And then I have the description, but then I also want to add rating. I want to add image URL. And then I also want to add genre. And I think that's pretty much all of the fields that we really need right now. So the one thing that we didn't take a look at is the user field. Now, the user field needs an ID, so let's go ahead and also specify that. And by default, we want the ID to be set to auth.uid. And then let's actually make the username and get rid of these other two fields. Make the username optional. So when you get rid of the exclamation point, that actually means that the field is optional. So username is now optional. Now let's save this. Great. So we have a full schema right here. But how are we actually gonna access this schema? Well, we're gonna write a query or a mutation. So let's go ahead and write a query like real time. So, all right, let's open queries. And now let's take a look at our app. So we have top 10 movies, new releases, and all movies. So let's kind of start with the easiest here, right? So list all movies. So let's call our query list all movies. Great. And then, like Gemini says, we're gonna by default just set the authentication to public. So let's do that. Because right now we don't really care about who sees our list of movies. And then we're also going to take advantage of the IntelliSense here. The IntelliSense already knows what your schema is, so it knows all the different fields that you need. So it knows that I need release year. It knows that I want, description and rating. And that's it. So what we can do is we can actually start our Firebase emulators. And this will start the Data Connect emulator for us. For whatever reason, the Data Connect emulator is not updated, so it's just going to download this for a couple seconds here. But what's actually happening behind the scenes here while we're waiting? So when you actually call list all movies, we're talking to our emulator, and that emulator is realizing, oh, you're talking to list all movies. Well, list all movies represents this specific SQL line that I wrote. And then every time that you run list all movies, behind the scenes, we're actually running SQL. But you're not actually having to write any SQL here at all. All right, so we have the emulator running. Let's take a look at whether this actually runs. So everything was successful. But it looks like we don't have any movies here. So let's go ahead and populate that. I wrote a handy dandy script here that goes ahead and seeds our database and adds all of our movies and everything to the database. So I'm just gonna run that really quick. And what this does is it actually uses our admin SDK, and it looks at our JSON, and it will automatically insert every single JSON object into the database for us. So I went from having a movies.json here to having all this information directly in the database. And all this information will be on GitHub. So just look out for that if you're curious about how this code ends up. Great, so let's take another quick look at list all movies. You run this, and just gotta, there we go. So you can see all of the different movies that were added to our database. Great, so we actually have information in our database, but we're not quite there yet. We have 2 more queries just related to the movies that we got to write, but those should be pretty quick. So we have top 10 movies. So how are we going to determine what movies are in the top 10? It's going to be completely based on the rating field. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort all of the different movies based on the highest rating. So what we want to do is we want to first do that sort, and then we want to limit the results by 10. So let's do that. So let's name the query again. Let's call it top 10 movies. Let's give it an auth level of user. So a user has to be logged in to call this. And then we want to still use the movies table, but we want to order by the rating field and make sure that it's descending. And then we also want to make sure that we limit it by 10. And then just like the other query, we just want to copy, and show all the same movies that we did before. So there we go. And then let's run this really quickly, and it looks like it succeeded. And so you can take a look at the rating, and we've ordered this based on the rating. So the highest rating is at the top, and then the lowest rating is at the bottom. So, and then we need one more query. Another query that's pretty easy, new releases. So we're going to do the same thing, but instead of sorting based on rating, we just need to sort based on the release year. So we can just copy the same query and then just replace rating with release year, and then just rename the query. And then instead of rating, just do release year here. There we go. And then I'll run this. And then you'll see that everything is ordered by release year. Great. We're doing good so far. But another thing, we don't know whether the user has watched or not watched a movie. So we just got to write that query. Now this is a little bit more complicated because it's a join table that we're going to query. But I'm with you all. We'll do it together. So let's call the query is watched, and then make sure that it is based on that we use the user authentication. But one thing that I'm missing here is a parameter. We want to make sure that we get this watched property based on what movie a user is looking at. So we'll have a movie ID of UUID. We want to make sure that we have that exclamation point because we can't actually run this query without a movie ID. And then we're actually going to look for inside the watched movie table, we're going to look for a primary key of movie ID set to movie ID. And then we also want to make sure that the user ID is equal to the currently logged in user. And then Gemini tried to do too much for me. That's okay. And then we want to make sure that we just get the movie ID. So how this is going to work is you call it is watched, and then is watched is going to give you the movie ID if the movie ID matches something that you've already watched. But what about the scenarios when the user hasn't watched it? Well, in that case, we'll just return null, which is fine. We'll just look for that in the on the Flutter side of things. So all of this is great. We just need to write some mutations next. So what mutations do is they modify your database. So we want to make sure that we modify the database so that whenever a user clicks on the favorite button, that we toggle the watched property to true. And then if someone clicks on that again to untoggle it, we remove that that movie from the watched movie table. So let's go ahead and do that. So we want to make two queries, one called add watched. And then we want to give the movie ID. And then we also, of course, want to make sure that the auth level is user. And then we want to do watched movie. insert. And then user ID expression is set to auth.uid. Now let's take a look at what this error is. Let's see, watch movies. Well, when in doubt, reload your VS Code window. All right, it should be called watched movie underscore insert. And if, let's see, watched movie underscore insert. All right, let's rerun the emulator. And then let's also take a look at the generated code here for us. Let's look at watched movie underscore insert. Yeah, okay, well that at least looks correct. It looks like we're adding the right information here. Watch movies or watch. All right, I am convinced that this is correct. So let's keep going here. Let's do remove watched. And then instead of doing delete here, or sorry, instead of doing insert, we do delete, and then we give the key associated with our information. So let's take a look here. All right. Schema validation error. All right, let's restart the emulator. And then just take a look at this. Let's call is watched. All right, well, this is a great example of what happens when you demo applications live. Let's actually restart the extension and see if that works. Yeah, I think the mutation itself is correct. This one? No, I think this is probably fine. Yeah. All right, let's take a look at our. Let's uninstall it and then go ahead and reinstall it. Oh, interesting. All right, well, let's try the manual method here. Let's add a new task, and then let's go ahead and do Firebase data connect SDK generate. And then it's just gonna re-download this emulator for us. And in the meantime, let's actually try and add our code to the movies.dart, or our Firebase service. Oh, wow. There we go. Okay. That's what happens when you're typing fast. Now, everything should work correctly because we named everything mutation instead of query. Perfect. All right. So let's keep going here. So we have add watched and remove watched, but then we have one more small thing that we need to add. It's the actual user. The user isn't inside the database yet. So let's go ahead and add user here. And then we don't really care about any information besides that. And then let's see, we'll do a user insert. And then we're going to use the data of the currently logged in user. Great. So it looks like we have pretty much everything that we need. I'm going to go ahead and uninstall here and then rerun our app. We're going to look at our terminal. Great. So it looks like we have everything set up. We just need to actually reference the information. So let's quickly look at our Firebase service. Now we have a bunch of to-dos here, but it's going to take a really quick second to just replace all that code. So instead of just throwing it unimplemented, let's actually call our generate SDK. So if you remember, our generate SDK is called movies connector. So we just need to do movies connector dot instance, and if you do dot, you can actually see all of the different queries and mutations that we already generated. So if you look at instance dot and then add user, it's already there. And then if you do dot execute, you can actually see that we have add user data and all of this information already there, already generated. So we'll just do an await here, and then there we go. We have a user that was added. So let's go ahead and click on sign in with Google. Let's go ahead and restart here. Looks like the auth token is now stale. Every single thing that could have gone wrong has gone wrong, but that's fine. Let's take a look at the storage, clear all the storage, rerun the app, and we'll be back up in no time. All right, while that's going on, let's go ahead and add all of the other fields. So we want to add movies connector dot instance dot get instance dot get top 10 most recent. And then we want to execute that. And then we'll return this. But it looks like, let's see. It looks like this is probably not enough, right? So if you do res.data, you can actually see all that information is there. So if you do res.data.movies and then just return that, well, it looks like we're not able to return the same type here. So all we need to do is we need to translate top 10 movies that were generated for us into the view model that our application needs. So that's pretty easy. You just do a .map and then, well, we need to do a res and then return a movie and then just do res.title, res.genre, res.image URL, res.id, and so on and so forth. Great. And then we also need to just convert that into a list. Great. Now let's sign in with Google again. Hopefully that works. Sign in with Google again. Auth credential is incorrect. That's all right. We'll just try and uninstall the app. And then just try and rerun it. So it looks like what's happening is the Auth SDK is actually just caching the original version of the ID token. But that's all right. Hopefully just reinstalling the app will be fine. All right. Well, we'll just move on with the rest of our app. For whatever reason, the authentication isn't quite working right now, which happens. But pretty much everything else should be working. So let's take a look at our top 10 movies. Top 10 movies. And then we'll just copy paste the exact same, translation that we needed before. And just add it here. And there we go. We have our top 10 movies. Now, we could do the same for get all movies and add watched and remove watched, but we're running out of time here. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask whatever, allow you guys to ask whatever questions you have, and yeah. So does anyone have any questions here? All right. Thank you so much.